Rain lashes against the cobblestones as a trembling peasant girl, drenched and desperate for shelter, stumbles into a gilded carriage meant only for the crown prince. Inside, velvet and gold frame a young heir whose every glance carries the weight of power, and the disdain of a world that would never allow her near. Outside, an arrogant minister watches with suspicion, ready to crush any breach of etiquette with ruthless precision. She clutches her shawl tighter, her eyes wide with fear and wonder, while the prince's stare lingers a moment too long. From this mistaken step into forbidden luxury will rise a journey no one could have foretold. A romance defying duty, danger, and destiny itself. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. Rain drove across the fields, in long slanting lines, stitching the sky to the earth with needles of water. The road had turned to a ribbon of mud, churned by hooves and wheels since dawn. She kept her head down and her shawl tight over her hair, feeling the cold find every seam in her clothes. The storm had a sound of purpose. It knew how to make a body small. She did not see the carriage so much as feel it. A pressure in the air, a hush in the rain where the canvas canopy had been set. Men moving with purpose in livery darkened by wet. A horse stamped, metal struck stone, a curt command cut cleanly through the storm. She looked up and saw the gleam of lacquered wood, the brass trim dull under the gray light. Someone opened the door and stepped back so a figure inside could arrange a cloak. It was a world within a world, a dry, perfumed room in motion, prepared to flee the weather and everything else. She hesitated only for the time it takes a breath to turn into a cough. The choice rose and made itself. She moved, quick, head down, lifted a boot slick with mud to the first step. The interior's warmth was a promise that undid all caution. She slipped past the liveried arm, an absent gesture in the storm, into the dim velvet space, and folded herself onto the nearest seat, small and silent, a shadow in a corner. The door shut without ceremony. Leather straps gave a low sigh. The carriage lurched as the driver called out. Hooves struck the road, and the world began to slide sideways. The roar of rain turned into a shell around them, a steady drum. She breathed in the scent of oil and rosewater and damp wool, and knew, with a certainty that chilled more than rain, that she had not stepped into a common coach. The man opposite sat very still. His boots were polished deeper than the sky could ever be. His coat was cut so exactly that the seams drew lines of intent across his shoulders. A sash lay quiet against his chest. He occupied the space the way a law occupies a town. She could hear his breathing above the wheels, slow and controlled. For a few seconds they both pretended there was no one else. Her heart caught up to her body. It found a pace fit for flight inside a space designed for ceremony. She pressed her palms into the coarse fabric of her skirt to steady them and felt the grit and damp there, the truth of who she was staining the prince's velvet with silence alone. He spoke first. His voice was not loud, but it reached every corner. "You have chosen a difficult doorway," he said. She had not seen him by daylight before, not this close. There was a tiredness behind the poise, a carefulness that had weight. The sash, the insignia on his collar, she knew enough to name him, though she did not let the word touch her tongue. "I chose a roof," she answered, keeping her gaze on the window where rain drew quick, silver ladders. The storm chose the rest. There was a beat of quiet. Wheels hit a rut. The carriage swayed. He did not reach for the leather strap above him. He rode the motion as if he had been taught to live where roads refused to be straight. "You must leave at the next stop," he said. "I will," she said, "if the stop arrives before the guard does." Another beat. In the corner of her eye, she watched him watch her. He took in the seam, mended twice on her sleeve, the mud at the hem, the shawl pulled so tight it left a mark at her throat. He was a man trained to count and measure. She could feel his sums. "Why this carriage?" he asked. "It opened," she said. "The others did not." A small humor moved near his mouth and did not quite arrive. "That is not an answer," he said. "It is the only one I have that fits in here." She should have held her apology like a coin and kept it. Instead, she offered it, because the room made honesty feel like a tax. "I did not see your face until the door closed," she said. "I do not belong in this seat." He returned his gaze to the window opposite hers. The countryside slipped by in wet strokes, low stone walls, olive trees bent under the weight of water, a dog at a farmhouse door, tail tucked. He said nothing. The carriage accepted their silence and wore it like a second upholstery. A drip of water fell from her shawl onto her wrist and ran beneath her sleeve with a cold finger. She flexed her hands against an old ache. She watched a thread on the hem of the seat cushion, red and fine, fray further with each jolt of the road. She thought of stepping down onto the mud, while the wheels still turned and leaving the warmth behind before it burned her with debt. There was a pull cord near his head. Not a bell. This carriage was not a house, but a leather strap attached to a latch above, the kind that let a passenger signal the driver in emergencies or the kind of decisions that felt like them. Her eyes flicked toward it and away. The movement was small, but in the tight space it was a bell of its own. "You are not safe," he said. "Not here." "I am dry," she replied. "That is not safety," he said. "Sometimes it is." He shifted his hand, just a fraction, as if to reach the strap. He didn't. The carriage rocked again. Outside, a horse snorted. The driver called to it with the voice of a man keeping his temper as if it were an animal that might bolt. She took a breath and found the calm that always came when there was nothing to be done. Words came easier then. "If you prefer, I can crouch in the footwell until the next change of horses," she said. "I make myself small when I must." "You already are," he said, and the shape of the words made them almost an apology. She lifted her chin. "Not in the way that counts." The line hung between them, taut and quiet. He looked at her fully then, not measuring clothes and mud, but searching the lines of her face for something he could place in the world he knew. He found nothing he could name. Something about that seemed to set him at a strange ease, or perhaps it was the truth of rain that softened everyone. His gaze moved to her hands. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Only wet," she said. Silence again. Outside, a river appeared and was gone, a flash of sediment-heavy water, hurrying toward a bigger certainty. The road angled. The carriage tilted. A leather strap groaned and settled. He said, "There are protocols for an intrusion." She did not look up. "I imagine there are. They are not kind. I imagine they are not." He regarded her. A man considering a script he has recited so many times he can see where it wears thin under the words. He pressed his thumb against the edge of the seat, a small, precise gesture. "Why were you on the road alone?" he asked. "Because the road did not wait to fill," she said, and left it there. The rest of it, how a day's bread can decide for you whether to respect a storm, lived unspoken. She would not lay her hunger in the lap of anyone, least of all a man who wore duty like a second skin. His eyes lingered 1 second too long. He shifted his shoulder, and the sash moved with a quiet sound that was nothing like her shawl. She watched the rain trace a word on the glass when the carriage slowed a fraction. Forgive, or perhaps forget. The letters broke apart as the speed resumed. She was not given to superstition, but the moment left a mark. The road improved. The wheels hit less often and with less anger. The driver must have found the middle, where wagons had ground a channel that one could use if one was important enough not to be pushed aside. The horses steadied, the rhythm a long, deep drum now. "You should not have been alone," he said. "I was not," she answered. "The rain was with me." He almost smiled. The movement reached his eyes and stopped there, as if it knew better. "You will disembark at the next relay," he said finally. "There will be a way to send you back." "I do not need sending," she said. "That is not the point." "What is?" she asked. He looked out the window again. That nothing attaches itself. He spoke as if to himself. Nothing that cannot be named. She listened to the rain. It was a thorough instrument. It left no sound untouched. She thought of how quickly a person could become a story by simply appearing in a place their shoes were not expected to touch. She counted heartbeats, with the rhythm of the wheels to keep her hands still. The carriage lightened a little. The storm had spent some of its will. A milky brightness spread over the fields. The sky was not exactly kinder, but it was less sure of its anger. The interior caught more light. She saw the fine grain of the wood, the stitching in the seatbacks, the discreet crest pressed into the metal latch. She lowered her gaze quickly. Respect had a shape. He followed the direction of her eyes. "You have seen," he said quietly. "Yes," she said, "and yet you do not tremble." "I am already shaking," she said. "It is simply small." He inhaled, a careful thing. His gaze shifted to the leather strap again. He did not move. "If I order the carriage to halt, there will be questions," he said. "If I do not, there will be others." "Then we are stopped either way," she said, and allowed herself the smallest curl of dry humor. It was not a habit. It was a tool to keep from slipping. "Your name," he said after a moment. She hesitated. To give a name here was to make something real, to hang her life on a hook that others could pull. "I am a girl who mistook a door," she said. "That will not do," he said. "It must," she replied. His eyes went to the window again, where the rain painted a veil. "You will tell me later," he said. It was not a question, and not quite an order. "If there is a later," she said. The carriage hit a smoother stretch, and for a moment the silence between them was not burdened, only present. The world felt like a long room where an answer had not yet been demanded. She closed her eyes, counted the beats of the horses, and opened them again to find him watching her with a look that could have been pity, but was not. "Do you think I will call for the guard?" he asked. "What you do is what you do," she said. "That is an answer, and not an answer," he said. She glanced at his hands. No ring on the finger that would tell a broader story. She knew such things were often matters of announcement, not jewelry, but the absence still told a small truth. The thought surprised her. It was too sharp, too close. She opened her mouth to change the subject, and the carriage saved her. A shout from outside, too clear to be mistaken for the driver's coaxing murmur. The horses slowed under a sharp hand. The carriage jolted, then rolled to a reluctant halt. The rain had not paused. It came with them, spattering with zeal against the stopped windows. They looked at each other. The space filled with a quiet that had not been there before, an alertness that belonged to animals more than people. Boots thudded against soft ground. There were more voices now, layered. A question asked too briskly to be anything but authority. An answer from the coachman, low and deferential. A second set of steps made mud speak in higher tones, the edges of a puddle where someone did not care to avoid the mess. He did not reach for the strap. He held himself taut with the kind of composure that can serve as a wall in a flood. In that moment she saw what it was to be made of etiquette and reinforced by fear for the lives it governs. "Do not speak," he said, without looking at her. She nodded, although the movement was more felt than seen. A knock at the door, not gentle. "Inspection!" a voice called, a formal word carried by an impatient mouth. "By order." The prince's jaw shifted once, a movement so small and so controlled it might have been a breath. He glanced toward the window where a shape loomed, broad hat, cape blurred by rain, a dark, official silhouette. The latch on the door clicked as a hand found it from outside. The handle gave a small, courteous rattle, as if it had been taught manners and forgot them rarely. "Do not speak," he said again. Lower now. He lifted his chin, set his shoulders, and in that second he looked like a portrait come to life and standing its ground. Her heart climbed into her throat. She stared at the lines in the wood of the seat back opposite and willed herself to become grain. Her damp shawl had stopped dripping. The water had found a rest. Something in her stilled with it. Fear has a way of making a person incredibly clear. "Your Highness?" A different voice tried from outside, oily with respect. "A matter of routine." The prince did not answer. In the breath of pause, she thought she heard the rain hesitate, listening. The world balanced on a hinge. He could have chosen with a word. He could have called the guard by name, stepped aside, lifted a hand to indicate what needed removing and why. He did not. She did not know if that restraint was mercy or a calculation in a game she did not understand. It did not matter. It was the only thing between her and a circle of faces ready to teach her what protocol did to those who stepped into the wrong room. The handle turned. The latch lifted. Wind slipped in through the seam and smelted the scents of oil and rosewater with wet leather and horse. Her gaze flicked up without permission from sense to the prince's face. His eyes had gone cool and bright, a light one could use to read by in an emergency. He gave the smallest nod. It was not to her. It was to himself. She set her hands flat on her knees. She pressed her heels into the floorboard to stop them from shaking. She forced her mouth into the line one uses to swallow. The door flew open, rain-washed light burst in, and the guard's eyes swept the velvet interior. The guard's eyes swept the velvet interior, sharp and suspicious. Rain ran down his cloak in rivulets that spattered onto the carriage step. His gaze lingered longer than courtesy allowed, narrowing when it caught on the faint outline of her skirt in the dim corner. The girl felt her pulse hammering against her ribs, each beat too loud for the silence inside. She lowered her head, pretending interest in the stitching of her shawl, as if invisibility could be sewn by will. The prince leaned back, perfectly composed, and broke the silence with practiced authority. "The road is long, and your interruption makes it longer," he said, his tone measured but edged. "Return to your post." The guard straightened, lips parting to protest, but the weight of the title, "Your Highness," hung unspoken between them. He inclined his head, muttered something drowned by rain, and stepped back. The door closed, the latch clicked, and darkness reclaimed its place against the storm. The girl did not move. Her breath stayed shallow, her hands pressed together tightly, until the jolt of the carriage resuming shook her into motion. She looked up once, just long enough to see the prince watching her, with an expression she could not name. It was not anger, not exactly, nor pity. Something in it carried a strange decision. "You will remain silent when they ask again," he said. Her voice was low, unsteady. "Why did you send him away?" "Because I chose to," he answered. Nothing more. The road stretched ahead, its rhythm pulling them forward. Hours later, the storm began to break. Sunlight spilled weakly through tattered clouds, casting the wet fields in a sheen of silver. The convoy slowed at a way station, a small courtyard where horses were changed swiftly under the eyes of stable boys and soldiers. The prince stepped down briefly, acknowledging the salutes of local officials. She stayed inside, hidden by curtains that framed her as if she were part of the furniture. Every pause threatened exposure. A boy carrying water glanced toward the window, curious, his steps faltering until a soldier barked his name and sent him running. She shrank deeper into shadow. The prince returned, cloak damp with mist. The carriage lurched forward once more. Inside, the closeness pressed heavier with each passing mile. The girl stole glances at him when she dared. His eyes were fixed outward, but his hand rested against his knee with a tension that betrayed thought. At last she spoke, carefully. "You could have had me dragged out." "Yes. And yet you did not." "I did not." Her breath caught on the simplicity of it. "Why?" He turned his head slightly. "Perhaps I dislike interruptions," he said, though the words carried more weight than their surface allowed. She lowered her gaze. The carriage rocked with the steady rhythm of horses, the sound of leather straps and clinking harnesses filling the spaces where words would not go. By midday, the convoy reached a larger town. Cobblestones rang under hooves, and balconies overflowed with townspeople craning to see the air of Spain. Windows glittered with damp banners. Children clapped. Women leaned out with flowers in their hands. Trumpets sounded, muffled by distance, and a small procession gathered around the royal carriage. The girl sat rigid, every muscle pulled tight, aware that the curtains of the carriage were no longer fully drawn. Nobility demanded display. Her reflection in the window glass showed her shawl pulled low over her brow, her posture meant to vanish. Beside her, the prince adjusted his gloves. A mask of calm settled over him. "You must remain unseen," he murmured, barely moving his lips. Her reply was a whisper. "And if I cannot, then I will see to it that you can." The crowd outside cheered as he stepped down, boots striking the wet stones. His hand rose in a brief gesture, acknowledging them with the trained grace of someone raised beneath eyes that never blinked. She remained within, her heart racing as soldiers stood close, shielding most of the view. It should have been enough, but not everyone watching belonged to the crowd. Riding alongside, a man in dark livery observed the carriage with unusual interest. His face was narrow, his gaze sharp, a hawk among pigeons. He had been near since dawn, part of the convoy, though always silent. Now his eyes lingered too long on the carriage windows, as though measuring what shadows concealed. The girl noticed. She turned her face toward the opposite wall, but the prickle of being seen stayed with her. When the prince returned and the carriage rolled forward again, she spoke softly. "The man in black watches." "I know," he said. "Does he suspect?" "He suspects everything," he replied. "It is his occupation." She shivered. "And what is mine then? To sit here until suspicion devours me?" He met her gaze. "Yours is to remain. Mine is to decide how." The words left no room for reply. As afternoon waned, the countryside returned, softer now beneath the pale sun. Vineyards stretched across low hills, the leaves heavy with drops. The convoy moved at measured pace. Inside the carriage, silence lingered, though not without weight. Her eyes traced the carved wood at her side. She wondered at its cost, at how many hands of her kind would have labored years for such polish. The thought pressed bitter on her tongue, yet opposite sat the prince, who seemed less at home in this luxury than she would have guessed. His gaze drifted off into the horizon, as though searching for something not built of ceremony. The moment stretched, delicate, until his voice broke it. "Your shawl is soaked through. You will sicken." "It will dry," she answered. "It will not dry in silence," he said. "And yet I prefer silence," she replied. He regarded her with an unreadable look. "So do I," he admitted. The truth in that landed heavily between them. By evening another halt came, this time at the edge of a provincial town where streets shone wet and lamps burned weakly through mist. The convoy paused for the prince to receive greetings from a mayor and local clergy. People thronged the street, craning for a glimpse. The carriage stood open to view more than ever, its curtains parted by attendants eager to display the air to the crowd. The girl kept her head low, heart pounding. A child pushed through the legs of soldiers, waving a sprig of rosemary toward the carriage. The girl's instinct pulled her forward. She almost reached for it before she caught herself, hands curling tight. Her movement drew the shadow of a glance from the hawk-eyed minister nearby. His suspicion sharpened. The prince returned after long formalities, his face composed. Yet when he seated himself, he spoke under his breath. "You nearly revealed yourself." Her cheeks burned. "A child offered me a blessing. And you would have accepted? Would you have refused?" She countered. His silence was answer enough. The carriage rolled on. Lamps dwindled into darkness. The convoy pressed forward under a starless sky. At last, they approached an inn for the night, its yard crowded with travelers, grooms, and townsfolk eager to glimpse the noble procession. Torches hissed against damp air. The carriages filed into the courtyard one by one, wheels clattering against cobbles. The girl descended briefly under the guise of a servant, carrying a small chest handed to her by an attendant who assumed her role without question. Her hands trembled under the weight, though not from the object. She felt eyes in the crowd, dozens, each moment a chance for discovery. The inn's common room swelled with noise and warmth, nobles entering through one door, travelers pressing at another. She crossed the yard quickly, intent on vanishing back toward shadow. But before she could retreat, a voice split the air. It was rougher than the courtiers' tones, edged by the countryside. Her name. Called once, uncertain. Called again, louder, carrying across the courtyard. She froze. A man stepped forward from the press of townsfolk, clothes patched, face worn by field and sun. His eyes locked on hers with recognition that burned away every veil. Her basket slipped from her hands, scattering across the stones. The crowd's chatter stilled, heads turning toward the sound. Whispers stirred, then hushed, until silence grew heavy enough to crush the air. The man called her name once more, his voice certain now, carrying clearly over the torches and the cobbles. Her name rang out over the cobbles, louder the second time, carried by the hiss of torches and the wet air. She felt the syllables hit her like thrown stones. For a heartbeat she could not move. The shawl clung to her hair, the basket lay open, its meager contents scattered like small secrets on the ground. A soldier glanced over, frowning at the disturbance. More heads turned. The inn yard seemed to draw breath and hold it. She tried to shrink into the shadow of the carriage wheel, but shadows can only do so much when a name has been said in public. She saw him then, the man from the lane outside her village. His face was the same under the grime and rain, a deep crease at the mouth from years of squinting into light, a scar that pulled one eyebrow a fraction higher than the other. He looked at her with the stunned relief of someone who finds proof of a story no one believed. His lips parted again. The prince's voice cut across the yard, not loud, but with the trained authority that makes sound obey. Clear the way. Guards moved, not rough yet, but decisive. The crowd shifted, pressed back to the walls. A groom hesitated, caught between helping her gather the spilled contents and obeying the command. He chose the safer loyalty and retreated. She forced herself to kneel. Fingers found the cloth bundle, the thin comb, a crust wrapped in paper that had picked up grit from the stones. She placed them back into the basket with care, because care was something she could control. The man from her village took a step forward anyway. The prince was already in the yard. Rain had flattened his hair at the temples. His cloak dripped onto the stones with slow insistence. His presence altered the space. The murmurs lowered to a hum. "Sir," the prince said to the man. "Calm. Cool. State your business." The man flicked his gaze from the prince to her and back. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, leaving a smear. "Your Highness," he managed, awkward on the word. "The girl." "She is in service," the prince said, smooth as a door that swings on oiled hinges. The man blinked. "No, she—" "In service," the prince repeated, and the steel under the silk showed. "And busy." She rose, basket in both hands now, knuckles white. The prince turned his head just enough for her to see the angle of his jaw, the warning in the line of it. He did not meet her eyes. He did not need to. The message was an order, wrapped in a mercy. She lowered her gaze, took a step toward the inner passage, pretending knowledge of corridors she had never walked. Her heart beat so hard she thought the sound might be visible in her throat. The man moved, as if to follow. A guard stepped into his path. "Back," he said, not unkindly. The man's eyes flared. "That girl is from—" "Enough!" Another voice intervened, crisp and unfamiliar, feminine and assured. A second carriage had rolled into the yard, its lacquer gleaming in the torchlight, its crest discreet and unmistakable. From it descended a woman in a traveling gown, too fine to be wet. She lifted her skirt just enough to keep it from the mud, revealing ankles she did not intend to show to anyone but stone. A lady's maid hovered behind her, guarding a parasol that the weather laughed at. Conversations snapped taut across the yard. Courtiers and officials bowed. The hawk-eyed minister appeared as if called by scent, already near her elbow. "My lady," the prince said, stepping forward. His voice shifted a degree, as it does when two roles meet within one throat. She inclined her head with contained warmth. "Your Highness," she replied. Her eyes flicked past him once, quick, taking the yard's measure like a hand on a pulse. They passed over the girl without stopping, and yet the girl felt the glance like the trail a blade leaves on air. He offered his arm. She took it. They moved toward the inn's inner door, under a canopy of deference. The girl, basket against her hip, seized the slip of chance built of ceremony. She pivoted, kept her head low, and reached the threshold of the service passage. The smell of yeast and smoke hit her, hot and human, as a kitchen exhaled. A scullion barreled past with a tray, muttered apology, did not look up. She stepped into that flow and let it take her. Behind her, the yard began to breathe again. The man from her village stood where he was, stunned at how easily a truth can be denied by the right tone. He narrowed his eyes, but the room for action had been closed around him like a lid. Inside, she found a wall to share her back with, and drew air until her lungs remembered how. The passage was narrow, flagged with stones worn to shallow bowls by years of feet. The heat from the kitchen stove made the wet shawl steam gently, bringing the smell of wool forward like a memory. Footsteps approached, measured, boot heels sure. She straightened before the minister turned the corner. His face was sharper at this distance, close-set eyes, a mouth practiced at keeping. He did not speak immediately. He looked at her basket, at the shawl, at her hands. "Whose service?" he asked. She did not lift her chin. "The prince's," she said. He looked amused without smiling. "Of course." The word had edges. She held her place. The narrowness of the passage made it a place where a lie could either survive or crack. "Name," he said. She kept her tone level. "I am not known by name in this house," she replied. "That is imprecise," he said. "It is true," she said. He tilted his head as if considering a specimen. "You will carry water to the upper room," he said at last. "If you are in service, be useful enough to fit the claim." "I will," she said. He stepped aside an inch. It was permission and a test. She moved past him. His sleeve brushed her shoulder, soft fabric over a bone that had arranged many days for other people. At the kitchen, a woman with flour on her forearms thrust a bucket at her without looking. "Upstairs. Third door," she said. "Mind the steps. They take what they can." She took the handle. The iron bit into the damp of her palm. Water lapped and threatened to spill. The staircase was steep and narrow. Each riser listened for a misstep. At the top, she paused at a small window. The yard below was still a shifting mosaic of light and movement. The prince and the noblewoman disappeared into the main chamber. The man from her village stood alone now, jaw set in a stubborn line. A guard spoke to him. He shook his head once, stubbornly. She forced herself away from the view and toward the third door. Inside, the room had been prepared with haste and skill, a fire coaxed to life, quilts turned back on a bed, a small table set with wine. She placed the bucket near the hearth and turned to go. He was there. He had entered by a door that connected to a private corridor. The cloak was gone. His shirt was open at the throat by a degree that court would punish if it was a choice. He looked at the bucket, at her, at the small water gathered at the rim from the climb. His expression did not change. "You will not go back into the yard," he said. She nodded once. "The man knows you," he said. "He knows my face," she said. "Faces travel." "You will be known as a servant," he said. "Then you must give me something to carry," she said, and the audacity surprised them both. A pause. The fire popped, releasing a small shower of sparks that died before they could find anything to catch. He stepped to a chest near the window, opened it, and took out a folded cloth. It was fine, embroidered at one corner. He set it on the table and considered it as if it were a question. Then he reached for a plain linen towel hanging near the washstand and handed it to her instead. "You will carry water and towels," he said. She accepted the towel. Their hands did not touch, but warmth traveled anyway, a thing without permission. He looked away first. "You will answer to no name," he added. "If addressed, you will bow your head and exit." "Yes, Your Highness," she said quietly. His gaze flicked to her face at the title. Her mouth tightened. She had not meant to grant it. He heard the regret and did not remark on it. "Go," he said. She went. In the corridor, the sound of voices rose and softened and rose again, an indoor tide. She descended to the kitchen, returned the towel to its rail, and let the woman with flour decide her next task. The rhythm of labor covered her like a cloak. It felt almost like peace. It did not last. A maid hissed at her to carry a tray to the outer hall, where wine and small plates were being arranged for those too fine to sit early with common travelers. She set her jaw and lifted. The tray wobbled, but did not spill. At the hall's end, the noblewoman stood speaking with a group of officials. Her posture was a lesson. The minister hovered near, a shadow that took notes in his head. The noblewoman turned slightly, just enough to see the girl approach. Their eyes met for an instant. The noblewoman's gaze was cool, assessing, and then gone. A blink of a blade in a sheath. The prince stepped into the group. Conversation flowed, smooth on top, full of stones beneath. The noblewoman's hand hovered, then settled on the prince's arm, the lightest of claims. The girl moved past as if invisible. If the eye at the center of that circle saw her, it did not break its own rules to follow. "Careful," a voice murmured near her shoulder. The minister had drifted to her side without sound. "You carry attention as if it were bread." "It is heavier," she said, under breath. He almost smiled. "We will see," he said. She escaped to the sideboard, put the tray down, and let her hands find tasks no one had assigned, arranging another plate, straightening a cloth. Invisible work, the kind that keeps a story in place. Beyond the archway, the common room swelled. Farmers and tradesmen took benches. Travelers with wet cloaks drew near the fire with cautious gratitude. The innkeeper moved through it all with the authority of a man who understands limits. The man from her village entered the room halfway, stopped, looked from face to face until his gaze caught the line of her shawl. He took a breath that looked like it hurt. "Do not," she said under her breath, though he could not hear her. The minister saw him too. Their gazes met, one heavy with intent, the other heavy with worry. The minister's mouth flattened for a moment. He turned his head and was at the prince's elbow within 3 steps. The prince listened without looking. He seemed to watch the room rather than any one person. The noblewoman continued her conversation with a courtesy that had edge enough to cut meat. The prince's hand rested lightly on the back of a chair. It looked casual. It was not. "Do you know him?" she heard someone ask at her side. A kitchen girl had slipped into the hall with a basket of bread. She kept her voice flat. "No." "Then why does he look at you like a ghost?" the girl whispered. She did not answer. The kitchen called. The bread had to be replenished. She retreated with the basket and returned with another. In and out, again and again, until the motion settled her. The gray light outside had gone black. Torches gave up at the door. Candles held their own inside, steady, small. A group of soldiers near the arch laughed at a story one of them told too loudly. The sound rolled up and lodged under the rafters. It shook down dust that had waited a long time for such a moment. The dust settled on the thin film of tension covering the room and made it visible. "Wine," a voice said, not unkindly, beside her. She turned to find the prince there, apart from his cluster for a breath. His face was composed. His eyes were not. She reached for a decanter. "Yes, Your Highness." He watched her pour, watched the upward tilt of her chin to make the angle right. "You are steadier now," he said softly. In motion, I am, she said. His mouth answered with the ghost of something like agreement. He lifted the glass, then set it down untouched. His fingers brushed the tablecloth's hem, a small, precise gesture as if to test its weave for an answer it could not give. You cannot remain, he said. I know, she said. He looked at her for a heartbeat longer than caution allows, then returned to his circle. She remained, hands on a cloth that did not need straightening. The noblewoman left the group a moment later to cross to a window. She stood facing the dark pane as if it were a mirror. The minister did not follow. He turned instead and drifted toward the common room, toward the man who had come in from the village. It was not a friendly drift. The man tensed when he saw the minister approach. Pride held him upright. Rage held him still. You make noise, the minister said. I say what is, the man replied. There is nothing to say, the minister said, mild. You are mistaken. The man's eyes cut toward the hall where the girl stood with a tray. The minister's gaze followed. A line of air tightened between the three of them. Leave, the minister said softly, before you ask a question that will not be answered. The man swallowed. A rough sound. He stepped back. Then he stepped forward again, as if a thought had shoved him in that direction. He lifted his chin, filled his lungs, and drew in enough air to say something that would be hard to unsay. The prince saw it begin. His hand rose not high, a calm signal. A guard moved. The movement was not quick enough to catch a word. Stop, the noblewoman said, equally quiet, from the window, not to anyone in particular. It was unclear whether she spoke to the guard, the man, or the air itself. She did not turn her head. The command hung in the room like a wire. The man did not stop. He took another step, into the threshold of the hall, where those who mattered could not pretend not to hear. He lifted his arm and pointed, a gesture so raw it split the night cleanly. The girl felt the point like a touch. Her body went very still. The tray in her hand steadied so perfectly it might have been part of the furniture. She looked at the prince just once, a question she could not form sitting openly in her eyes. He did not answer it. He could not. He stood like a man who has learned to fight by appearing not to be in a fight. Speak carefully, the minister murmured to the man. Too late. The man's voice rose to reach the rafters, thick with certainty and something like grief. She is not a servant, he said. She is the girl from our village. She is the girl from our village, he finished, the last word striking the beam above like a thrown nail. In the instant that followed, the room did not breathe. The torch nearest the door hissed and guttered, a thread of smoke drawing a line between the man and the hall. She felt the line as if it were tied to her chest. The prince moved first. He stepped from the circle of officials and placed himself between the threshold and the hall, an action clean as a blade laid across a page. You mistake your courage for usefulness, he said, calm and cold. This is a household matter. The man flinched but held his ground. Your Highness, I mean no. You have already meant too much, the prince replied. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You will not address my servants in public. The word servants hung there, heavy as a bell. It tolled through the inn. A guard put a hand on the man's arm. Not rough. Firm. The man looked at the hand, then passed it to her. She did not move. She held the tray as if it were an oath. He tried again. Enough, the prince said. Silence answered. The guard guided the man back across the threshold. Another guard closed the space like a door. It was done with the courtesy one offers a dangerous tool when placing it back on its shelf. The noblewoman turned from the window. What a dreary interruption, she observed, voice gentle and edged. Do your soldiers not keep doorways any longer, or do men now believe themselves invited to speak? The minister inclined his head, eyes lowered. It will be remedied, my lady. Now, the prince said, and the word had two audiences. Movement returned, cautious at first, then fuller. Conversation stirred, shallow and quick, like water over stones. He turned slightly, not enough to draw the eye of the room, just enough that she, at the sideboard, could see the angle of his face. "Return to the corridor," he said, low. She bowed her head and obeyed. The hall swallowed her. She felt the air change back there, a slight release, as if a bowstring had eased a fraction without losing its aim. In the passage, the stones underfoot held the day's heat in pockets. She set the tray down on a bench and rested her hands on either side of it until the ache in her fingers found something like order. Footsteps approached. She straightened. It was the prince. He glanced down the corridor to be sure they were alone, then back to her. The closeness of the space brought his scent forward: wool, clean linen, rain, dried on heat. "You will not be named," he said. "I already was," she answered. "Not by anyone who matters here," he said. "Not with weight." She met his eyes. "You cannot keep a name from sticking once it has flown." "I can make it costly to use," he said, and there was nothing romantic in it, only fact. Her throat worked around a breath. "Why?" A muscle in his jaw shifted. "Because you are under my protection." She almost laughed. It came out like a held breath with shape. "That is the worst place for me to be." "Perhaps," he said, "but for tonight it is the only place you are." She set her palm flat on the bench, then lifted it again. The wood was warm where she had left her hand. "He knows me," she said. "He thinks he does." The prince corrected softly. "It is enough." "For him," he said. "Not for me." They held each other's gaze a moment. Too long, dangerously long in a passage anyone might enter. He broke it first. "You will not return to the yard," he said. "You will remain in service until dawn. I will have you seated inside the carriage before the courtyard fills." "And then?" she asked. "Then we leave," he said. It answered one thing and refused another. She nodded once. "Yes, Your Highness." Something in him tightened at the title. He looked past her, toward the murmur of the kitchen, toward duties lined up like cups on a shelf. "You should not have been alone on that road," he said, and the sentence carried more than its words. "I am often where I should not be," she replied. "It is a habit learned from need." He drew in air. For a heartbeat he looked as if he might say something with marrow. Instead he caught it on his teeth and swallowed it whole. "Go," he said. She lifted the tray and went. The passage shifted behind her as he turned back toward the room that owned his time. The minister stood 2 steps into the hall, hands folded as if in prayer, but eyes alert. "Your Highness," he said. The prince did not stop. "A question," the minister continued, falling into pace. "Later," the prince said. "It will be sooner, I fear," the minister murmured. "The man from the village has a stubborn posture." "Postures can be adjusted," the prince replied. "Some are rigid," the minister said mildly, "especially when righteousness is misinformed." They reached the threshold of the room. Light and sound spilled over them. "You will not pursue this tonight," the prince said, without looking. "Tonight I will sleep," the minister said, with a hint of humor. "But morning is not as polite." The prince moved inside. The noblewoman's gaze met his across candles and conversation. She waited. She always did when the moment required it. He crossed to her. "Your Highness," she said, voice lowered for him alone. "I suppose the countryside has learned to speak without invitation." "It learns what it practices," he said. "And what do you practice?" she asked, almost idly. "Endurance," he said. Her mouth curved. "We are well matched then." His eyes flicked away. She let the subject go, not because she had lost interest, but because she had measured its cost against the room's temperature. She changed to something safer. The journey, the road, the applause in the town that had looked like gratitude, but sounded like hunger. He answered. His voice did what it knew how to do. He stood where he was meant to stand. The knowledge that a name had been thrown against the night and had not stuck yet sat like a small ember under his ribs. Across the hall, the girl moved in the choreography of service. She kept to the edges, carrying, replacing, folding. She did not look toward the threshold. She did not look toward the man from her village, who had been urged to a bench and given a cup he did not drink. He stared at the grain of the table as if it could answer him. A kitchen clock ticked past an hour. Candles sank, noise softened, bodies fatigued. Even suspicion has to close one eye eventually. When the hall thinned, the noblewoman took her leave for the chamber reserved for her and her maid. She inclined her head to the prince with the care of a promise that had not yet become a contract. "Until morning," she said. "Until morning," he answered. She moved away. The minister watched her go with a look that belonged to administrators, the expression of someone counting possibilities by habit. The prince turned to the sideboard to set down a glass he had not emptied. The girl was there, hands steady on a stack of plates. "You will sleep a little?" he asked low. "If the stones under the bench allow it," she said. "Take the alcove by the inner stair," he said. "Others need it more," she replied. He studied her, just long enough. "Do not leave," he said. "Would you prefer I stay because you wish it?" she asked. "Or because leaving would make your night heavier?" "Both," he said, without flinching. The truth placed itself between them like a folded cloth. She inclined her head. "Then I will stay." He exhaled quietly. "At dawn, be at the coach before the yard wakes." "I will." He stepped away. The room moved toward rest. She found the alcove, not by the inner stair. She would not take what she had told him she would not, but near the kitchen door, where the warmth of the oven bled through the wall. She sat on the bench and let her head tilt. A cook's boy slid past with a pan that still steamed. He did not see her. That was fine. She slept in breaths, not in hours. Before dawn, the world behind her eyes loosened its hold. She woke with the sense of being watched, which is not the same as being seen. She sat up and found no one there but the habit of fear. Outside, the yard's silence had begun to break. Hooves clinked softly. A groom coughed and was shushed. She rose, smoothed her skirt, arranged the shawl so it did not announce itself as much as cover. In the corridor, she nearly collided with the minister. He had the restful look of a man who had not slept and had accepted it. "Already at work," he observed. "The work begins early," she said. He nodded. "In my experience, it never ends." He studied her without malice. "The road awaits." She met his gaze. "I am in service," she said. "You are in stories," he corrected. "Be careful which ones you feed." He stepped aside and let her pass. In the yard, lanterns made small islands of yellow in a sea of gray. The sky held the color of old pewter. Breath steamed from horses and men. She moved to the royal carriage, as if she had been born to know which wheel creaked and which latch stuck when damp. A valet handed up a folded cloak without looking closely. "For the new girl," he muttered to no one in particular. "By order." She took it. The wool was plain but tightly woven, a kindness disguised as practicality. She drew it around her shoulders and felt the night loosen its grip on her bones. The prince emerged from the inn, buttoning his coat with short, precise movements. He did not look toward her. He did not need to. He knew where she was by the absence she filled. The noblewoman followed with her maid, her face composed into travel's version of grace. The minister was already mounted, reins loose in one hand, eyes set on the road as if it had confessed something to him. The man from her village stood near the gate, hesitating. A guard spoke to him in low tones, a hand open in a gesture that suggested leaving would be wise and staying would be tiring. The man looked toward the carriage one last time. She kept her face averted. At length he nodded, turned, and went out into the morning that had not yet decided to be kind. The prince reached the carriage, paused, and put his hand to the door latch. He glanced toward the side where she waited just within shadow. "Inside," he said softly. She stepped up, settled into her corner. The cloak held her like a sentence she had agreed to serve. He took the seat opposite. The door shut. The world outside shrank to the sound of harness and the whisper of wheels beginning to turn. The convoy left the yard at a dignified pace. The inn receded. The road took them back into fields edged with low walls and ditches that caught the pale light like dull mirrors. Dawn lifted its face over the hills without enthusiasm. Inside, silence found them again. The breath they shared fogged the glass according to no schedule but their own. "You did not run," he said at last. "You asked me not to," she answered. "I could have ordered it," he said. "You did not," she replied. He looked out. "I dislike orders that do not understand why they exist." "Then you are rare," she said. "Unpopular," he corrected, but the corner of his mouth softened. The road steadied. The carriage fell into a rhythm that eased the body while it complicated the mind. "You will be watched," he said, "by everyone who has nothing else to do and everyone who has everything to lose." "I have less than they do," she said. "That is not a shield," he replied. "It is when you learn to move differently," she said. He considered that. "You intend to leave at the next town," he said, not a question. "I intend to search for a moment when leaving does not undo you," she said. "And you think such a moment exists," he said. "I hope it does," she said. "Hoping is easier when you are not dry." His eyes flicked to the cloak. "Does it help?" "It helps me remember I am not a problem you are solving," she said. "I am a person sitting across from you." The words landed between them with the surprising softness of a heavy thing set down carefully. "Do you think I do not see that?" he asked, too quickly. "I think you are trained not to," she said gently. He leaned back. The carriage took a curve. The world slid along the window. He watched it until the edges of his posture eased. "I am trained to keep the lid on a boiling pot," he said. "It requires both hands." "And what sits under the lid?" she asked. "Everything that could spill," he said. He turned to her. "Do you believe I enjoy it?" "No," she said. "I believe you are good at what hurts you." Silence held. The horses snorted in unison. The driver called to them by name. The sound of it carried because kindness does, even when it is a habit more than a sentiment. They changed horses at a relay where a boy ran with a bucket and a man counted harness straps as if each one were a prayer. The minister rode closer, as if the proximity of suspicion made the miles shorter. He lifted 2 fingers to his hat in a gesture that could be read as respect or a reminder. The prince returned nothing. The gesture experienced the weather alone. The noble woman's carriage drew level once, a brief alignment. She looked out. Their gazes crossed through glass and distance. She did not nod. She did not need to. After a heartbeat, she lowered her curtain. "Does she know?" the girl asked. "She knows everything she is willing to say aloud," he said. "And the rest?" she asked. He did not answer. They rolled on. Villages gathered at the edges of fields, square and low, each with a bell that knew when to ring. People paused in doorways. Children ran to the fence and waved uncertain hands. The convoy did not stop. The world outside did what worlds do when power passes. It watched and remembered. Inside, they lived in the tension between 2 breaths. "At the next town," she began. "No," he said, so quietly it could have been missed. She held his gaze. "You cannot carry both the pot and me." "I am not carrying you," he said. "You are walking beside me through a room I cannot leave." "And when the room fills with those who wish to push me out?" she asked. "Then I will stand in the doorway," he said. "It will cost you," she murmured. "Everything does," he said. The words were not complaint. They were arithmetic. They moved through a stretch of road lined with plane trees. The leaves shook themselves dry and failed. Dappled light tried and tried again. The carriage's shadow strobed across the ditch. "I do not ask for what cannot be given," she said, after a long while. "What do you ask?" he asked. "A way to leave that does not make me a story told in anger," she said. "I do not know if I can give that," he said, "but I can keep you from worse." "For how long?" she asked. "For as long as I can pretend it is within my power," he said. She breathed out, a sound almost like a laugh, and not one at all. "Then pretend a little longer." He looked at her the way a man looks at a horizon when he has been told it is closer than it appears. "I will." They changed horses again near noon. The pace quickened without being unseemly. The road widened. Mile markers appeared with more certainty, carved numbers worn by the weather and read by those who needed to measure things they could not control. The minister spoke to a captain. The captain spoke to the driver. The driver clicked his tongue and kept his hands steady. Rumor drifted back along the line like smoke that refuses to rise. It smelled faintly of the word servant and something that could have been village or could have been mistake, depending on who told it. The noblewoman did not appear again. Her carriage kept to its lane, closer than not, like a pulse that does not wish to betray itself. The prince and the girl said little. Words felt like tools that might slip and cut. When they did speak, it was to set stakes in the ground around the small camp of what they shared. "You should eat," he said, and handed her a piece of bread from a parcel someone had placed under the seat at dawn. She took it. "Thank you." He watched her not eat it yet. "If you fall ill." "I will not," she said. "I am too stubborn." "Good," he said. She held the bread and did not bite. It was not reluctance. It was the decision to make itself count. The countryside began to change. Fields gathered themselves into more deliberate lines. Walls straightened their spines. The air held a sense of nearness that had nothing to do with geography and everything to do with expectation. Ahead, the road lifted over a low rise. Beyond it, the distance wore a color different from field and tree. There is a shade that cities make when they exhale, softer than smoke, heavier than mist. It lay there, faint and certain. The prince looked toward it without moving his head. The girl followed his gaze. "Do you fear it?" she asked. "I fear what gets lost there," he said. "And what is that?" she asked. "Quiet," he said, "and the honesty of small things." She held his eyes. "Then keep both where you can." "Where is that?" he asked. She touched the cloak at her shoulder. "Here," she said. "For now." He nodded once, as if something had been set in order that could not be bound by rope or decree. The road straightened. Signs appeared at intervals, carved and sensible. More riders joined, peeling in from side tracks like tributaries accepting a river's claim. The convoy gathered its dignity around it as a cloak against the nearness of judgment. She drew the cloak closer, not because of cold, but because it felt like the sensible thing one does when nearing anything that has more eyes than walls. They did not speak again for a time. Words would have had to choose sides. The afternoon drew itself long and pale. The horses found a second wind born not of rest, but of habit. The driver shifted his seat and addressed them softly, more friend than commander now. A gust came up, carrying with it a smell she could not name until she realized it was stone, warmed by many days and cooled by many nights. It is the scent gates learn when they have been opened and closed more times than a human life can count. She looked at the prince. He had already felt it. His fingers tightened once on the edge of the seat and released, a man practicing acceptance because nothing else works. Far ahead, not yet visible, the capital waited. The certainty of it drew a line through the air they breathed, a quiet discipline that made even the birds choose their branches more carefully. The carriage rolled on, steady and resolute, carrying them toward a city that would test whatever they had managed to keep between them in the space of a road. The walls of Madrid rose from the horizon like a solemn promise, towers and rooftops breaking the morning haze. The convoy slowed as it entered the wide avenue leading toward the heart of the city. Flags hung heavy with damp from balconies, and bells tolled from distant steeples, their sound carrying like iron across the air. Crowds lined the streets, pressed shoulder to shoulder, their cheers spilling into the road like waves that could not be contained. Inside the carriage, she sat still, her shawl drawn close, though the cloak given to her shielded her from the cold. The prince sat opposite, his posture impeccable, but his eyes restless. Through the small opening in the curtains, he caught glimpses of faces, hopeful, curious, demanding. Each pair of eyes sought something from him. "You are returning to a cage," she said softly. His gaze flicked to hers. "And you are walking into one with me." She shook her head faintly. "No, I am only passing through." The carriage jolted as the wheels struck a rut in the stone. He steadied himself with one hand, but his eyes did not leave her. "You underestimate what lingers once it has touched the air," he murmured. A shout rose outside, the cry of his name echoing through the throng. He let the curtain fall closed again. For a long breath, silence filled the space between them. The gates of the palace stood open, flanked by soldiers in gleaming uniforms, muskets polished, bayonets catching the gray light. Trumpets sounded as the carriages rolled under the archway. The courtyard beyond was a pool of ceremony, ministers in dark coats, ladies in silks, attendants ready with gestures of duty. The prince descended first. His boots struck the stones with precision. He acknowledged the officials with a short nod, his cloak falling perfectly into place. Behind him, the noble woman emerged, every fold of her gown arranged to suggest inevitability. Murmurs rippled, respectful, measured. The girl stepped down last, carrying the small chest she had been given as cover. She kept her head low, the shawl shadowing her face. She moved with the pace of service, unobtrusive, part of the machinery of arrival. Yet she felt the press of 100 eyes, the weight of suspicion and curiosity brushing against her like invisible hands. Inside, the corridors of the palace swallowed them. High ceilings, echoing footsteps, the smell of polished wood and wax candles. The prince walked at the center, his presence a lodestar. She trailed behind, her gaze fixed on the floor, memorizing the patterns of stone as if they were a secret language that might save her. That evening, the palace prepared for a reception. The hall filled with nobles, ministers, and foreign dignitaries. Chandeliers spilled light onto gilded walls. Musicians played softly from a gallery above, their notes weaving through the air with practiced elegance. The prince stood among them, every word he spoke weighed like coin, every gesture scrutinized. The noblewoman stood near his side, her smile measured, her eyes calculating. The minister lingered in the shadows, watching everything, noting what others dismissed. The girl moved through the crowd as a servant, carrying trays, replenishing glasses. Each step was a risk. Whispers followed her sometimes, half-formed sentences quickly swallowed. She avoided their eyes, but not his. When their gazes met across the hall, the world shifted. His voice faltered for the smallest fraction of a second, though he recovered with seamless grace. She looked away quickly, but her pulse had already betrayed her. Later, in a quieter corner, as she collected empty cups, he appeared beside her. His presence alone was enough to make the air taut. "You should not be here," he said under his breath. "You placed me here," she replied, keeping her eyes on the tray. "You could still leave," he said, "and if I do, will you breathe easier?" His silence was louder than any answer. She set the tray down. Her hands trembled once, then stilled. "Then let me stay until you no longer wish it." His jaw tightened. "That moment will not come." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the distance between prince and peasant collapsed into nothing. Then voices swelled nearby, and he stepped away, mask restored. The evening deepened. The hall grew warmer with candlelight and wine. Laughter rang louder, though beneath it, currents of tension moved unseen. At the height of the reception, the prince stepped forward, The musicians hushed. The crowd quieted. He spoke of duty, of tradition, of the kingdom's strength. His words were polished, shaped for ears that hungered for assurance. Yet as he spoke, his hand moved to his breast pocket. From within, he drew a small square of cloth, the embroidered handkerchief she had left behind in the carriage. He unfolded it once, then folded it again with care, as if the act itself were ritual. With deliberate motion, he placed it back against his heart. Murmurs spread like fire across the hall. Ministers exchanged glances. The noblewoman's eyes narrowed, the faintest flicker breaking her practiced composure. The minister's expression hardened into calculation. The prince continued speaking as though nothing had happened, yet everyone had seen, and she, standing among the servants at the edge of the hall, felt her knees weaken. Later the hall emptied slowly, nobles retreating to private chambers, attendants gathering the remnants of ceremony. She slipped away into the gardens, where lamps lit gravel paths and fountains whispered in the dark. The air smelled of damp earth and roses, their blooms heavy with dew. She stood near a stone balustrade, looking out over the city lights scattered like stars across the valley. Her chest ached with the weight of what had just happened. She did not know whether to grieve or to hope. Footsteps approached. She turned, and he was there. No sash, no ministers, no noblewoman, only the man beneath the crown. "You should not have done it," she said. "I should have done it sooner," he replied. "They saw." Her voice broke. "They will speak." "Let them," he said. "They have spoken all my life. This time they will speak the truth." She shook her head. "It cannot last. You know it." He stepped closer. The lamplight caught the edge of his profile, sharp and certain. "Then let it last tonight." Her breath trembled. "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow will come as it chooses," he said. "But I choose this." His hand rose, hovering near hers, not touching, waiting. She let her fingers shift, just enough that their hands brushed. The contact was small, almost nothing, yet it carried the weight of all that had been denied them. "You cannot keep me here," she whispered. "I cannot," he admitted. "But I can keep you with me, if only in the one place no minister can command." She looked at him, searching his eyes. "Where?" He touched his chest lightly. "Here." The garden fell silent, except for the fountain. The world beyond the palace walls could not reach them for that single moment. They lingered in that fragile stillness until voices stirred at the far edge of the garden. Servants moved with lamps, searching. Duty was never far behind. She stepped back, but he caught her hand, just enough to stop her. His grip was not of command, but of plea. "Do not vanish from me," he said. Her eyes filled. "If I stay, you will lose what you are bound to keep." "If I lose it, then it was never truly mine," he answered. Tears blurred the lamps into halos. She squeezed his hand once, then pulled away gently. "Remember me," she said. "I could forget the throne before I could forget you," he replied. She turned and walked into the shadows, her shawl trailing like a fading promise. He stood where he was, watching until the darkness took her form. The next morning, ceremony resumed. Ministers whispered, the noblewoman held her silence, the court calculated its next move. The prince bore it all with the same composure he always had. Yet something in his gaze had changed, something that no protocol could disguise. And on his breast, visible to all, the embroidered handkerchief remained, a quiet defiance worn in plain sight. That evening, he returned to the garden alone. The city lights flickered below, and the roses bowed under the weight of their own beauty. He stood by the balustrade, breathing the air she had breathed, holding the memory of her voice as if it were more real than the stones under his feet. The night did not answer him, yet it did not need to. She was already there, in the only place he had promised she would remain. And in that silent vow, he found peace, love not declared to the world, but sealed forever in the heart that chose her above all else. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you like the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.